The most dangerous thing in the Appalachian Mountains isn't a Bigfoot. It's not a Dogman either. The most terrifying thing you can encounter out there is being caught between these two creatures when they're hunting each other. I spent 3 years camping in remote areas across Kentucky, Tennessee, and West Virginia, and I've seen things that convince me these two cryptids are locked in an ancient war that most people don't even know exists. What I'm about to share isn't speculation or folklore. It's what I witnessed firsthand, and it's why I'll never go back to certain areas again. I've always been an avid backpacker. Started when I was young, just weekend trips at first, then longer expeditions into more remote areas. There's something about being completely alone in the wilderness that calls to me. The silence, the rawness of nature, the feeling that you're stepping into a world humans weren't meant to see. Over the years, I pushed further and further into the backcountry, seeking out the most isolated spots I could find. Places where the trails disappeared, where you might not see another human being for weeks at a time. I wasn't trying to prove anything or chase thrills. I just wanted to experience nature in its purest form, untouched and undisturbed by civilization. During those years, I heard stories. Old-timers in small mountain towns would mention things when they'd had enough whiskey. Tales about the big hairy ones in the hills, about wolfmen that walked on 2 legs, about areas you should never enter after dark. I listened but never really believed. Thought it was just local legend, the kind of stories people tell to keep outsiders away from their favorite hunting spots or to add mystery to their mountain heritage. Then I started noticing patterns in what they said. The old folks would mention that certain valleys had the big ones, Bigfoot, and those areas were relatively safe. You might hear wood knocks at night, find tracks in the morning, but you'd be left alone if you respected their space. Other places had the wolfmen, Dogman, and you avoided those spots entirely. Those were hunting grounds for something that didn't distinguish between deer and humans when it was hungry. But nobody ever talked about places that had both. It was always one or the other, never together. A valley would either be Bigfoot territory or Dogman territory, but never shared ground. That should have told me something right there, but I didn't put it together until later, until I stumbled into the middle of their war and barely made it out alive. See, most people don't understand that Bigfoot and Dogman aren't just two different cryptids sharing the same forests. They're mortal enemies. They hate each other with an intensity that's hard to describe unless you've seen it. And when I say hate, I don't mean they just avoid each other or compete for resources in the way bears and wolves might. I mean they actively hunt each other, fight to the death when they meet, and turn entire mountainsides into battlegrounds. The folklore I eventually dug up after my first encounter confirmed what I'd seen. Across Appalachia, the Pacific Northwest, the Great Lakes region, anywhere both creatures have been sighted, there are stories of violent confrontations between them. Old accounts from trappers and hunters who witnessed fights, found bodies, or stumbled across aftermath scenes that look like war zones. The more I researched, the clearer the pattern became. Areas with heavy Bigfoot activity rarely had Dogman sightings, and vice versa. It's like they can't coexist in the same territory. And that makes sense when you understand what each creature is and what drives them. Bigfoot are primarily herbivorous, though they'll eat meat opportunistically. Fish, small game, carrion if they find it. They're intelligent creatures that live in family groups, build crude shelters from branches and leaves, and establish long-term territories that they defend and maintain. They're peaceful by nature, curious about humans but cautious, and they avoid conflict whenever possible. Multiple accounts describe Bigfoot families living in the same general area for years, even decades, raising their young and coexisting relatively peacefully with the wilderness around them. Dogman, on the other hand, are apex predators, pure carnivores with a hunting drive that never stops. They're aggressive, territorial in a different way than Bigfoot, not defending a home so much as clearing competition from their hunting grounds. They're more solitary or run in small packs, and they're more beast-like despite walking on two legs like Bigfoot. Where a Bigfoot walks with an almost human gait, calm and measured, a Dogman moves like a predator, always alert, always hunting, always dangerous. Their intelligence seems different too, more instinctive than thoughtful, driven by hunger and aggression rather than curiosity or social bonds. When you put those two species in the same forest, conflict is inevitable. Bigfoot families need large territories with reliable food sources, berry patches that produce fruit season after season, streams with fish runs, areas with plenty of deer and small game for occasional meat. They invest in their territories, learning the seasonal patterns, knowing where food will be abundant at different times of year, maintaining paths through the forest, clearing areas around their sleeping sites. Dogman are nomadic predators that follow prey migrations. They don't respect boundaries, they don't establish permanent homes, and they see everything in their path as either food or competition. When a Dogman enters Bigfoot territory hunting deer, they're not just competing for the same prey, they're also a direct threat to young Bigfoot who can't defend themselves. And Bigfoot, like any intelligent creature protecting their family, will defend their territory aggressively when that threat appears. But Dogmen don't back down. They're predators to their core, with speed, claws, and teeth that make them formidable fighters. An adult Bigfoot might be 7 to 9 feet tall and weigh 600 to 800 pounds, with incredible strength that comes from a life of foraging, climbing, and moving through rough terrain. A Dogman is slightly smaller, 6 to 8 feet, 400 to 600 pounds, but they're faster, more aggressive, and built specifically to kill. Their claws can disembowel, their jaws can crush bone, and their predatory instincts make them relentless. When these two meet, neither yields. The result is violence on a scale that's hard to imagine unless you've seen the aftermath. I learned all of this the hard way, starting with what I found in northeastern Tennessee in the fall of 2019. I was hiking alone in Cherokee National Forest, about 15 miles from the nearest trailhead. This was deep backcountry, the kind of place where you don't see other hikers because most people don't have the stamina or the stupidity to go that far in. The trail had disappeared about 5 miles back, and I was navigating by topographic map and compass, following a ridgeline that promised to lead to a series of overlooks I wanted to photograph. The weather was perfect. Crisp autumn air, leaves turning brilliant reds and golds, that kind of clarity you only get in the mountains when a cold front has just passed through. Around midday, I came across a clearing that stopped me cold. It looked like a bomb had gone off. Trees were snapped at trunk level, not broken by wind or age, but snapped clean through like toothpicks, the kind of damage that requires enormous force applied suddenly. The ground was torn up in a circle about 50 feet across with massive gouges in the earth, like something had been dragged through the dirt with tremendous weight behind it. Branches and debris were scattered everywhere, some thrown 30 or 40 feet from the center of the clearing. The smell hit me before I even entered the space, a mix of wet dog, rotting meat, and a musky odor I'd never encountered before. It was overwhelming, making my eyes water. I stood at the edge of that clearing for a long time, trying to process what I was seeing. My first thought was that maybe a small tornado had touched down, but the damage pattern was all wrong. Tornadoes don't create circular destruction zones with that kind of precision. The broken trees all pointed toward the center, not outward like they would from spinning winds. Then I noticed the prints. There were 2 distinct types of tracks in the torn-up ground, and both were fresh enough that they hadn't been washed away by rain or obscured by falling leaves. The first set were large, human-like footprints, about 18 inches long with clear toe impressions. 5 toes, just like a human foot, but massive, with the big toe separated slightly from the others like you'd see in someone who'd never worn shoes. These were Bigfoot tracks, no question. I'd seen casts and photos before, but seeing them in person was different. The depth of the prints suggested incredible weight. These impressions were sunk 2 or 3 inches into soil that should have been relatively firm. The stride length between them was longer than any human could manage, easily 5 or 6 feet between steps. The second set of prints were different. They were canine-like, elongated with clear claw marks at the end of each toe. But the gait was all wrong for a 4-legged animal. These prints showed a bipedal stride, with the weight distribution indicating upright walking. They were nearly as large as the Bigfoot tracks, maybe 16 inches long, with the toes spread wide for balance. The claw marks were deep, gouged into the earth like someone had dragged daggers through the soil. Dogman tracks, had to be. Nothing else made sense. The prints told a story if you knew how to read them. There were drag marks where something heavy had been pulled across the ground, the furrows deep enough to show that whatever made them had been fighting to stay in place. Collision patterns where the 2 creatures had impacted each other with enough force to leave crater-like indentations in the soil. The earth compressed from the impact. Blood spatter on the rocks, not a lot, but enough to show that someone had been injured. The blood was dark, already oxidizing, but still fresh enough to be tacky when I touched it. I found clumps of reddish-brown fur caught on broken branches, coarse hair, thick and wiry, like what Bigfoot are typically described as having. Each strand was maybe 4 or 5 inches long, and when I pulled one free to examine it, I could see it was hollow like guard hairs on a deer. Then I found darker fur, shorter and with a different texture, more like wolf fur but coarser. This was black or very dark brown, and it came away in clumps like it had been torn out during the struggle. I spent 2 hours in that clearing, walking the perimeter and trying to piece together what had happened. The Bigfoot tracks led uphill toward a rocky outcropping, the stride length indicating running. Whatever had made those prints had been moving fast, fleeing, or chasing, hard to tell which. The spacing between the tracks got longer as they approached the rocks, showing acceleration. The Dogman tracks circled the area multiple times, like it had been pacing or hunting, before heading toward lower elevations. The pattern suggested hunting behavior, circling, searching, probably trying to pick up a scent or track its prey. When I followed the Bigfoot tracks about 50 yards uphill, I found a small cave entrance partially hidden behind a fallen tree. The entrance was maybe 3 feet high and 4 feet wide, dark inside, with the Bigfoot prints leading right to it and disappearing into the shadows. I didn't enter, wasn't about to crawl into a cave that might have an injured or angry Bigfoot inside, but I noticed the defensive positioning. Someone had stacked rocks near the entrance, creating a partial barrier that would slow anyone trying to enter. Fresh breaks on nearby branches suggested they'd been snapped off deliberately, maybe to use as weapons or clubs. Some of the branches were as thick as my wrist, broken clean through. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just some random encounter between 2 animals. This was a territorial confrontation, a fight, maybe even a hunt. One creature had pursued the other. They'd fought in that clearing with incredible violence, and the Bigfoot had retreated to a defensive position in the rocks. Whether the Dogman had given up or was planning to come back, I had no way of knowing. But the evidence suggested the Bigfoot had survived and was holed up, nursing injuries and waiting. I found more evidence as I examined the area more carefully. Tree trunks had scratches at different heights, claw marks from the Dogman gouged into the bark at around 6 or 7 feet up, deep grooves that showed where it had braced itself during the fight. what looked like handprints where the Bigfoot had pushed against trees during the struggle, leaving impressions at 7 to 8 feet high. The bark was scraped away in these spots, showing the pale wood underneath. The violence of the scene was stunning. Whatever had happened here was brutal and recent. The blood was still tacky to the touch, and the broken branches were still oozing sap. This had happened within the last few hours, maybe less. As I was taking mental notes of everything, trying to memorize the details so I could write them down later, I heard something that made my blood run cold. A distant howl echoed through the forest, coming from somewhere down the mountain, maybe half a mile away. It wasn't a wolf. I've heard wolves before, that higher-pitched yipping that turns into a howl. It wasn't a coyote either, with their yapping chorus. This was deeper, more guttural, with a quality that sounded almost human in its rage. The howl seemed to go on forever, bouncing off the ridges and filling the forest with an oppressive sense of menace. It was a sound of pure aggression, a challenge or a threat. I left immediately. The sun was starting to set, maybe an hour of good light left, and I was not about to be in that area after dark. Not with whatever made that sound still in the vicinity, possibly hunting the injured Bigfoot in the cave. I packed up my camera, stuffed my notes in my pocket, and headed back the way I'd come, moving faster than I'd ever moved on a trail. Every shadow seemed threatening, every sound made me jump. By the time I got back to my car, my shirt was soaked with sweat despite the cool air. When I got home, I couldn't stop thinking about what I'd seen. I started researching everything I could find about Bigfoot and Dogman encounters, spending hours online reading old newspaper accounts, forum posts, folklore collections, anything that might shed light on what I'd witnessed. And that's when the pattern emerged, clearer than I ever expected. I found accounts from all over the country describing similar confrontations. In Kentucky in the early 90s, a hunter reported seeing a dogman chasing a deer right through what he recognized as a Bigfoot bedding area, a spot where the undergrowth had been flattened and arranged into crude nests, something he'd seen before and recognized. He watched from his tree stand as 3 Bigfoot emerged from the trees and drove the dogman off with thrown rocks and swung branches, pelting it until it retreated. But the story didn't end there. The hunter came back a week later to the same spot and found the area abandoned, with signs of violence everywhere and what looked like the remains of a young Bigfoot scattered in the underbrush. The dogmen had come back at night when Bigfoot have poor vision and taken revenge. The family had fled, abandoning territory they'd probably held for years. Another account from Michigan told of a fisherman who heard what he described as a screaming match in the woods one evening, Bigfoot vocalizations, those deep whooping calls, competing with dogman howls. The sounds went on for 20 minutes, echoing across the lake, before he heard the unmistakable sounds of fighting, crashes, roars, the sound of trees being hit or shaken. The next morning, curious and a little frightened, he hiked to where the sounds had come from and found the ground torn up over a wide area, blood sprayed on the leaves and rocks, and fur from both creatures scattered around. He collected some of each type of fur, but when he tried to show people in town, they told him to forget what he'd seen. He never went back to that fishing spot. The competition between these creatures isn't just about territory in the simple sense. It's about survival. Bigfoot establish territories in food-rich areas and defend them because their family groups need those resources to survive through winter, to raise their young, to maintain their numbers. When dogmen enter those territories hunting deer or elk, they're depleting the food sources the Bigfoot depend on. But more than that, dogmen are opportunistic predators. They'll hunt anything they can kill, and young Bigfoot or old, weak Bigfoot are vulnerable. They can't run as fast, can't fight as well, and they make easier targets than deer. The Bigfoot know this. They've learned over generations that when dogmen show up, their family is in danger, not just from competition for food, but from direct predation. On the flip side, Dogman see Bigfoot as competition that needs to be eliminated. Two apex species can't share the same hunting ground. That's a rule in nature. The Dogman's predatory instincts drive them to eliminate threats, and a family of Bigfoot using up the local game population, defending the best hunting areas, is definitely a threat to a Dogman's survival. So when they encounter each other, neither backs down. Both are fighting for survival, for territory, for resources that mean the difference between life and death. The hatred between them is primal and absolute, hardwired into their instincts over thousands of years. I learned just how absolute that hatred was during my second encounter in eastern Kentucky in the summer of 2020. I decided to camp in Daniel Boone National Forest in a remote area near Cave Run Lake that I'd been wanting to explore for years. This was country I'd hiked through before, though never overnight. I hiked in about 8 miles, following old logging roads and game trails, and set up camp in a valley between two ridges. It seemed like a perfect spot, sheltered from wind by the ridges on either side, a small creek nearby for water that I could filter, plenty of firewood from fallen branches, and beautiful views of the surrounding mountains. The valley floor was relatively flat, covered in tall grass that had died back from the summer heat, and there were enough trees to string up my bear bag. The first night, I woke around 2 a.m. to the sound of heavy footfalls circling my camp. Not running, just walking with a steady, deliberate pace. The footsteps were too heavy to be a deer, too measured and purposeful to be a bear wandering through. They circled completely around my tent, maybe 20 yards out, taking their time. I could hear the grass being crushed under enormous weight, hear the occasional stick snap when whatever it was stepped on deadwood. I stayed in my tent, barely breathing, listening as the footfalls made a complete circuit around my campsite. Then they faded into the distance, heading west up the ridge. I didn't sleep for the rest of that night, just lay there in my sleeping bag, knife in hand, listening to every sound. When dawn finally came and light started filtering through the tent fabric, I crawled out and immediately started looking for tracks. I found large footprints in the soft ground around the perimeter of my camp, exactly where I'd heard the footsteps. Bigfoot tracks, clear as day, pressed deep into the earth. The prints were huge, maybe 17 inches long, with the same 5-toe pattern I'd seen in Tennessee. Whatever had circled my tent weighed at least 600 or 700 pounds based on how deep the impressions went. The tracks led from the western ridge, around my camp in a complete circle, and back up into the forest on the western side. It had come down from its territory, checked me out, and returned. I should have packed up and left right then. That was a smart move, the sensible thing to do. A Bigfoot that, curious about my camp, might come back, and next time it might not be so passive. But I convinced myself it was just curiosity. The Bigfoot had probably smelled my food cooking the evening before and came to investigate. It had found a human, realized I wasn't a threat or worth bothering with, and left. I decided to stay another night, do some exploring during the day, and head out the next morning. Big mistake. I spent the day exploring the area and found more signs of Bigfoot activity everywhere I looked. About half a mile up the western ridge, I found broken saplings that had been woven together into a crude shelter. The saplings were bent and twisted in ways that couldn't happen naturally, creating a lean-to structure about 6 feet tall. Inside were flattened areas where something large had been sleeping or resting. Rocks were stacked near the stream in a way that seemed deliberate. Not random tumbling from water flow, but stacked in small cairns like territorial markers. Large prints led into the thick forest uphill from the valley, following what looked like a well-used path through the underbrush. I was definitely in Bigfoot territory, no question about it. But they seemed to be tolerating my presence, so I figured one more night would be fine. They'd investigated me, found me harmless, and were leaving me alone. As long as I respected their space and didn't go poking around their shelter or mess with their markers, we'd coexist peacefully. That evening, while I was cooking dinner over my camp stove, just ramen noodles and some jerky, nothing fancy, I noticed something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. The forest had gone completely silent. No birds chirping, no insects buzzing, no squirrels rustling in the leaves. Just oppressive, total silence, like someone had thrown a switch and turned off all the background noise of the wilderness. Anyone who spent time in the woods knows that silence like that means one thing. A predator is nearby, a big one, and every other animal has gone still to avoid being noticed. I grabbed my flashlight and stood up from my camp stove, turning slowly to scan the ridgelines around me. The sun was getting low, maybe half an hour of daylight left, and the shadows were getting long. That's when I heard it, a low, guttural growl from the eastern ridge, the one opposite from where the Bigfoot had come the night before. Not like a bear. Bears make huffing sounds, blowing noises when they're annoyed or warning you off. This was a sustained growl, deep and threatening, with an edge of intelligence behind it. Something that knew I was there and wanted me to know it was there too. I clicked on the flashlight even though there was still daylight, needing the comfort of a tool, something to do with my hands. I swept the beam across the eastern ridgeline, my hand shaking. For a moment, I didn't see anything, just trees and rocks and shadows. Then two eyes reflected the light back at me, way too high off the ground to be a deer or a bear. The eyes were yellowish amber, like a dog's eyes, but larger and spaced wide apart. They didn't blink or look away, just watched me with an intensity that made my stomach drop. My hand was shaking so badly the flashlight beam kept jerking around, but I kept it trained in those eyes. Whatever owned them just stood there on the ridge, maybe 100 yards away, perfectly still. After maybe 30 seconds, felt like an hour, the eyes moved, tracking along the ridgeline from south to north. Then they disappeared from view as the creature moved down the far side of the ridge, heading north along the base of the mountain. I thought maybe it was over, maybe whatever it was had lost interest and moved on, following its own path that just happened to cross this valley. I was breathing hard, my heart pounding, but starting to relax. Then I heard crashing from the western ridge, the Bigfoot's ridge, heavy, fast movement through the underbrush, branches breaking, the sound of something big moving with urgent purpose. I spun around and saw a massive silhouette against the darkening sky. A Bigfoot, at least 8 feet tall, barreling down the slope directly toward the valley where I was camped. I froze completely. Couldn't move, couldn't think. Just stood there holding my flashlight like an idiot, while this enormous creature charged down the mountainside, covering ground faster than seemed possible for something that size. But the Bigfoot wasn't looking at me. Its attention was focused entirely on the eastern ridge where I'd seen those amber eyes. It wasn't running toward me. I just happened to be between it and wherever it was going. When the Bigfoot reached the valley floor, maybe 40 yards from my camp, it stopped and vocalized. I'd heard Bigfoot calls on recordings before, watching videos online and listening to audio files from researchers. But hearing it in person was completely different. It was a deep, booming howl that echoed off both ridges and seemed to vibrate in my chest, like standing next to a huge speaker at a concert. The sound was layered somehow, like multiple voices at once, and it carried a clear message even to my human ears. This was a challenge, a warning, a declaration of intent. The Bigfoot was announcing its presence and its willingness to fight. From the eastern ridge, the Dogman answered. Its howl was higher pitched than the Bigfoot's, more aggressive, with that same canine quality I'd heard in the Tennessee forest, but amplified. It sounded like a challenge accepted, like the Dogman was saying it wasn't backing down. The sound made my stomach drop, made every instinct scream at me to run. The Bigfoot charged up the eastern ridge, moving with shocking speed for something so massive. Its arms pumped as it ran, helping with balance and momentum, and I could hear its feet hitting the ground with tremendous force. The Dogman was moving through the brush above, crashing away from the Bigfoot's approach, but not fleeing, positioning, choosing its ground. Then, maybe 200 yards up the slope, the sounds changed. The crashing stopped. For maybe 3 seconds, there was complete silence. So quiet I could hear my own heartbeat pounding in my ears. Then I heard the impact. It sounded like 2 cars colliding head-on, a solid, meaty thud that carried down the mountain and made me flinch. The snarling and roaring that followed was unlike anything I've ever heard before or since. The Bigfoot making deep bass roars mixed with the Dogman's higher-pitched snarls and yelps. Trees were shaking violently enough that I could see their tops whipping back and forth even in the fading light. Branches breaking with gunshot cracks, thuds of impact that sounded like someone hitting a heavy bag with a baseball bat. Guttural screams from both creatures, sounds of pain and rage mixed together. The fight lasted maybe 2 minutes, but it felt like an hour. I stood next to my camp, frozen in place, listening to 2 cryptids trying to kill each other on the ridge above me. My camp stove was still hissing beside me, my dinner forgotten. Then I heard rapid movement. They were taking the fight deeper into the forest, the sounds fading as they moved away from my location, heading north along the ridge. I didn't sleep that night, just sat by my fire with my camping knife in my hand, jumping at every sound. Every time a branch cracked or an owl hooted, my heart rate spiked. I kept the fire burning bright all night, feeding it constantly, convinced that the light would keep me safe if either creature came back. When the sun finally came up, I packed everything as fast as I could, stuffing gear into my backpack without bothering to organize it properly. On my way out of the valley, I passed the spot where they'd fought. I couldn't help myself. I had to see. A small tree had been completely uprooted and thrown aside, its roots pointing skyward. The ground was torn up in a 10-foot circle, the grass ripped away and the soil exposed. There was a blood trail leading northeast into the deeper forest, but I couldn't tell if it was from one creature or both. The blood was dark, almost black against the brown soil, and there was enough of it to show that someone had been seriously hurt. The thing that really stuck with me about that encounter was how completely invisible I'd been to both of them. The Bigfoot had practically run right past me, close enough that I could smell it, that musky wild smell, and didn't even slow down. I was irrelevant. They were so focused on each other that a human standing in their path didn't even register as worth noticing. But if I'd been standing in the wrong spot, if I'd been on that ridge when they collided, if I'd been in the path of that uprooted tree when it flew, I would have been collateral damage. They wouldn't have stopped to avoid me. They wouldn't have even seen me until it was too late. That's when I started to understand the real danger of these 2 creatures and their ancient war. It's not just that they're individually dangerous, though they absolutely are. A Bigfoot could snap your spine with one arm, and a Dogman could tear you apart in seconds. But the real, immediate danger is that when they're engaged with each other, everything else ceases to exist. They're so focused on their hatred, their territorial dispute, their need to eliminate the threat, that the rest of the world disappears. And if you're caught in the middle of that, you're in more danger than you would be from either creature alone. Because they're not trying to hurt you, they just don't see you. You're background noise, and background noise gets destroyed when 2 apex cryptids decide to fight. I researched fatal encounters after that, trying to find documented cases of people who'd been caught between Bigfoot and Dogman, trying to understand if what I'd experienced was unusual or if others had been in similar situations. Most of it was speculation, rumors, stories that couldn't be verified because the people who could verify them were dead or missing. But there were a few cases that stood out that seemed credible, even if they could never be proven. A hunter in northern Minnesota in the late 80s was found dead in the woods during deer season. Massive trauma to the chest and head. The area around his body showed signs of a violent struggle, with both Bigfoot and Dogman tracks all around him in the mud. Trees were damaged, the ground torn up, blood everywhere. The official cause of death was listed as a bear attack because that's the only explanation that made sense to people who didn't know about cryptids. But the people who found him, locals who'd lived in those woods their whole lives, said it didn't look like any bear attack they'd ever seen. They said it looked like he'd been caught in the middle of something, that he'd been in the wrong place when two things much bigger than him decided to fight. A hiker vanished in Washington state in an area known for both Bigfoot and Dogman sightings, a wilderness area where both creatures had been reported multiple times over the years. Search teams found his backpack torn to shreds, the fabric ripped like someone had taken a knife to it, surrounded by both types of tracks pressed into the soft forest floor. His body was never recovered. The official theory was that he'd been attacked by a bear or mountain lion and dragged off, but his backpack wasn't dragged. It was destroyed in place, ripped apart, and scattered. The theory among locals was that he'd been in the wrong place at the wrong time, caught in the middle of a territorial dispute he didn't even know was happening. These creatures don't mean to hurt humans, at least not usually. We're just not relevant to their conflict. Bigfoot generally avoid humans, and Dogman, despite being predators, usually have enough natural prey that they don't need to risk attacking a human. But when two apex cryptids decide to settle a territorial dispute, anything in the area becomes a potential casualty. Not because they're targeting humans, but because they're so focused on each other that they don't notice or care what else is around them. That's what people don't understand. They think encountering a Bigfoot or a Dogman is the dangerous part, and they're not wrong. Both creatures can be deadly. But the really deadly situation, the one that's almost impossible to survive, is being in an area where both are actively engaged in their war. There are warning signs you can learn to recognize if you know what to look for, and you're paying attention. Finding both types of tracks in the same area, especially if they're fresh, pressed into mud that's still soft, crossing each other's paths, is a huge red flag that you're in a contested zone. Trees marked at different heights tell you both creatures have been through recently. Bigfoot tend to break branches high up, 6 to 8 feet, where they can reach easily, while Dogman leave claw marks lower, at 4 to 6 feet, where they can stretch to mark. Unusual silence in the forest is another sign. When either creature is nearby, all the other animals go quiet. The birds stop singing, the squirrels stop chattering, even the insects seem to pause. If you find evidence of violent struggle, torn earth, broken trees, blood spatter on rocks and leaves, you need to leave immediately. And if you hear vocalizations from both types of creature at the same time, those distinctive howls answering each other across the ridges, you're already in danger and need to move fast. I should have learned my lesson after Kentucky. Should have stayed out of the deep wilderness, or at least avoided areas showing signs of both creatures. Should have recognized that my luck was running out, that I was pushing too hard into territories where I didn't belong. But I was stubborn, maybe even a little addicted to the adrenaline, to the thrill of being close to something most people don't even believe exists. In the fall of 2021, I decided to do a multi-day backpacking trip in Nantahala National Forest in western North Carolina. It was stupid, reckless, and it almost got me killed. The trip started out fine. Beautiful weather, perfect hiking conditions, stunning views of the mountains turning brilliant colors with autumn foliage. I spent the first day and a half on established trails, seeing a few other hikers, enjoying the relative safety of popular routes. By the third day, I was deep in the wilderness area, following an old logging road that wound through a remote valley. These logging roads were abandoned decades ago, barely visible now, overgrown with saplings and ferns. It was late afternoon, maybe 5 o'clock, with good light still filtering through the trees at an angle. I came around a bend in the road and stopped cold. 20 yards ahead, crouched over a dead deer, was a Dogman. The creature was massive, easily 7 feet tall even while crouched, with dark brown fur so thick it looked black in the shadows under the trees. The head was distinctly canine, with a pronounced snout and ears that swiveled independently, constantly moving to track sounds. It was actively feeding on the deer, its muzzle covered in blood, completely focused on its meal. The deer's rib cage was exposed, the internal organs already consumed, and the Dogman was tearing chunks of meat from the hindquarters with its teeth. I was upwind, which meant it hadn't caught my scent yet. The wind was blowing from the north, carrying my scent away from the Dogman rather than toward it. Moving as slowly as I could, barely breathing, I started backing up. One step at a time, testing my weight before fully committing to each step, trying not to snap any twigs or rustle any leaves. Everything I'd read about predators said the same thing. Don't run, don't make sudden movements, don't trigger the chase response. Just back away slowly and pray it doesn't notice you until you're far enough away to escape. I got maybe 10 yards back, my eyes never leaving the Dogman, when I heard a sound from my left that made my heart stop. A wood knock, 2 sharp raps of wood on wood, the deliberate sound that Bigfoot used to communicate with each other or mark territory. The sound was clear and unmistakable, sharp in the quiet forest. The Dogman's head snapped up instantly, the deer forgotten. It was staring into the forest to my left, at the source of that sound, its ears forward and alert. Every muscle in its body tensed, ready to fight or flee. A second wood knock came, closer this time, maybe 50 yards away in the trees. The sound echoed slightly, sharp and purposeful. This wasn't a random falling branch. This was communication, a warning, maybe a challenge. Then the Bigfoot emerged from the tree line. It was absolutely huge, 8.5 feet tall at least, maybe more. Reddish-brown fur covered its entire body, thick and shaggy, especially around the shoulders and head. It walked upright with complete confidence, moving with the kind of deliberate purpose that made it clear this creature feared nothing in these woods. Its arms were longer in proportion to its body than a human's, muscular and powerful, hanging almost to its knees. The face was more human-like than ape-like, with a flat nose and intelligent eyes that I could see even from a distance, eyes that were tracking the Dogman with absolute focus. I was now literally between them. Bigfoot to my left, Dogman ahead and to my right, and me standing in the middle of an old logging road like the world's most exposed target. The Bigfoot noticed me. I know it did because we made eye contact for maybe half a second. Its eyes were dark and penetrating, and in that brief moment I felt like it was assessing me, measuring me, calculating whether I was a threat or an obstacle. Then it focused entirely on the Dogman, and I might as well have ceased to exist. I was dismissed as irrelevant, beneath notice compared to the real threat standing 40 yards away. The Dogman left the deer carcass and stood at full height, that low growl building in intensity. It was standing its ground, not backing down despite the size difference, despite clearly being outmatched in terms of raw strength. The growl resonated in my chest, making my ribs vibrate. The Bigfoot responded with a display I'd read about but never seen: chest beating. It brought both fists down on his chest in 4 heavy thumps that I felt like bass drums, the sound echoing off the trees and filling the forest. It was a challenge, a warning, a show of dominance that said this territory was claimed and defended. They started circling each other, and I realized with growing horror that I was in the middle of their circle. The Bigfoot was moving to my left, the Dogman to my right, and the circle was tightening with each step. I had maybe seconds to get out before they engaged, before I became an obstacle in their path. I started taking slow, careful steps backward toward the edge of the logging road where the forest began. My eyes were locked on both creatures, trying to track their movements simultaneously, praying they wouldn't notice me moving. The Bigfoot took 2 steps forward, closing the distance. The Dogman matched it, muscles tensing under its fur, claws extending. They were maybe 25 yards apart now, with me between them, and I could feel the tension building like a physical force. Then the Bigfoot charged. It didn't roar or give any warning, just exploded into motion with shocking speed, going from standing to full sprint in an instant. It was running straight toward the Dogman, which meant it was running straight toward me. I threw myself sideways into the brush, my shoulder hitting the ground hard as the Bigfoot rushed past. My arm actually brushed against its fur as it went by. The texture was coarse and thick, and the smell was overwhelming. That musky, wild smell mixed with earth and old sweat. Then it was past me, and I was scrambling backward on my hands and knees, trying to get away from the fight. The Dogman met the charge head on instead of dodging. They collided with an impact that sounded like a car crash. A solid, meaty thud followed by the crack of bone or the snap of breaking branches. I couldn't tell which. The sound made me wince, even as I scrambled backward, trying to get distance. The fight itself was savage and brutal, more violent than anything I'd ever witnessed. The Bigfoot was using its superior strength and size, grabbing and throwing, trying to grapple and control the Dogman's movement. The Dogman was faster, more agile, using its claws and teeth to slash and bite, darting in and out of the Bigfoot's reach. I saw the Dogman's claws rake across the Bigfoot's shoulder, saw blood spray in an arc that caught the late afternoon light. The Bigfoot roared in pain and rage, a sound that made my ears ring, and grabbed the Dogman by what I guess was its throat or upper chest. It lifted the Dogman off the ground and slammed it bodily into a tree trunk. The tree shook from the impact, bark flew in chunks, and I heard something crack. Wood or bone, I couldn't tell. But the Dogman recovered faster than I expected, faster than seemed possible after an impact like that. It twisted in the Bigfoot's grip, using its flexibility and speed, and went for the legs with its teeth bared, trying to hamstring or cripple. The Bigfoot stumbled but didn't fall, kicking out with massive force and catching the Dogman in the side. The impact sent the Dogman rolling across the ground, tumbling through the underbrush before it came up in a crouch, still ready to fight. I'd gotten maybe 30 feet away, crawling and stumbling through the underbrush, branches scratching my face, and I realized I needed to get much further. I stood up and ran. Broke every wilderness rule I knew. Just crashed through the forest, making as much noise as a spooked elk. Branches whipping my face and arms, roots trying to trip me, pure panic driving me forward. I didn't care about being quiet, didn't care about not running from predators. I just needed distance between me and that fight. Behind me, the fight continued. I could hear roars and snarls, trees shaking violently, the wet sound of claws on flesh and fists on bone. I ran for maybe half a mile before my legs gave out and I collapsed behind a fallen log, gasping for air, my whole body shaking uncontrollably. My lungs burned, My legs felt like jelly, and I thought I might throw up from the exertion and fear. The sounds of the fight had stopped. I didn't know who had won, if either of them had won, or if they'd both moved on to continue their battle somewhere else. I just knew I needed to be as far from there as possible, that I needed to get out of these woods before dark. I stayed hidden behind that log until my breathing calmed down and my hands stopped shaking quite so badly. Then I used the fading light to orient myself by the sun and started making my way back to the main trail. I didn't follow the logging road, didn't want to risk going back past where they'd fought, so I navigated cross-country using my compass. It took hours. By the time I reached the main trail, the sun had set, and I was using the moon and my headlamp to see. I hiked through the night, didn't stop, didn't rest, just kept moving until I reached my car at the trailhead at dawn. When I got home and checked myself over in the shower, I found a scratch on my jacket from when the Bigfoot had brushed past me. The fabric was torn, 3 parallel lines, maybe 4 inches long, cut clean through the outer layer and into the insulation underneath. It could have been a branch, could have caught on a sharp stick when I threw myself into the brush. But I don't think it was. I think it was the Bigfoot's hand or fingers tearing through my jacket as it rushed past, so close that its knuckles or claws caught the fabric. That's how close I came to being grabbed, thrown, or crushed during their fight. That's how close I came to not making it out. If I'd been standing a foot to the left when the Bigfoot charged, it would have hit me directly. If the Dogman had dodged instead of meeting the charge, I would have been in its path. If either of them had stumbled in my direction during the fight, I would have been underneath them, trampled or crushed without them even realizing I was there. After 3 encounters and years of thinking about what I'd seen, researching every account I could find, I finally understood why Bigfoot and Dogman hate each other so completely. It's not random aggression or simple competition for resources. It's a fundamental incompatibility between 2 very different types of creatures, forced to share the same territory by circumstances neither can control. Bigfoot are intelligent and social creatures that establish long-term territories spanning miles of forest. They invest in these territories over years or even generations, learning the seasonal patterns, knowing where food will be abundant at different times, marking boundaries, and maintaining paths. They build shelters, teach their young, and defend their families with the same intensity any intelligent creature would. When they find a good territory, a valley with clean water, plenty of forage, reliable game, they settle there and create a home. Not just a hunting ground, but a home where they live their lives. Dogmen are nomadic predators that follow prey migrations, moving through territories without regard for who established them first. They're opportunistic hunters that take what they want and move on when resources are depleted or when they feel like it. They don't respect boundaries because they don't establish boundaries of their own. They're always on the move, always hunting, always pushing into new areas in search of prey. When a Dogman enters Bigfoot territory, several things happen that make conflict inevitable. First, the Dogmen start hunting the same prey the Bigfoot depend on: deer, elk, whatever large game is available. They're efficient hunters and they can decimate a prey population quickly, taking more than they need because their instinct is to kill while prey is available. Second, the Dogmen pose a direct threat to young or weak Bigfoot. A Bigfoot juvenile, maybe 2 or 3 years old, can't defend itself against an adult Dogman. It's vulnerable, and a Dogman wouldn't hesitate to hunt it if given the opportunity. Third, and maybe most important, Dogman don't leave voluntarily. They stay in an area until the game is gone, until there's nothing left to hunt, or until they're driven out by force. The Bigfoot response is predictable and necessary. They defend their territory aggressively, using their superior size and strength to drive the dogman away before real damage is done to the prey population or to vulnerable family members. But dogmen are predators to their core, and their instincts tell them to eliminate competition. A family of Bigfoot occupying prime hunting territory, defending the best areas, is competition that needs to be dealt with. So when these two species meet, the result is inevitable: violence. This creates an endless cycle across the wilderness. Dogmen push into territory, Bigfoot defend, fights break out. Neither species can coexist with the other because their fundamental natures are incompatible. I found evidence of this in migration patterns that I pieced together from accounts across different regions. When Bigfoot family groups are well established in an area, when they've been there for years and have strong numbers, dogman sightings in that region drop to zero. The dogmen either avoid those areas because they know they'll face resistance, or they try to enter and get driven out so thoroughly they don't come back. When dogmen move through a region following caribou migrations in the north or deer populations in the south, Bigfoot activity stops completely until the predators leave. The Bigfoot either retreat to defensible positions and wait them out, or they abandon the territory temporarily and return later. It's not just competition in the normal ecological sense. It's fundamental incompatibility at the deepest level. Bigfoot are trying to live peacefully, to maintain stable territories where they can raise their young and exist without constant conflict. Dogmen are apex predators that take what they want, when they want it, and eliminate anything that gets in their way. The hatred between them is ancient and instinctive, hardwired into their very being over thousands of years of conflict. It's in their nature as much as breathing or eating. If you spend time in deep wilderness areas, you need to understand this dynamic because it could save your life. Encountering a Bigfoot in its territory is scary, absolutely. These are enormous creatures with strength that could snap your bones like twigs. But they're usually not dangerous to humans. They avoid us, they don't want conflict with us, and as long as you leave their territory and don't threaten their family, they'll let you go. I've read dozens of accounts of people encountering Bigfoot, hikers, hunters, campers, and walking away unharmed because the Bigfoot chose to avoid confrontation. Encountering a dogman is more dangerous because they're predators with less fear of humans. They're more likely to view a human as potential prey, especially if they're hungry or if you stumble into their hunting grounds. But even dogmen generally have enough natural prey that they don't need to risk attacking something that can fight back. Most dogman sightings end with the creature leaving the area, avoiding the human rather than engaging. But encountering both in the same area, especially if they're actively engaged in a territorial conflict, is exponentially more dangerous than either creature alone. When Bigfoot and dogmen are hunting each other, humans become irrelevant background noise. Neither creature will stop to avoid you. Neither will break off combat because you're in the way. You're just an obstacle, and obstacles get destroyed when two apex cryptids are fighting for survival. The signs of a conflict zone are clear once you know what to look for, and I can't emphasize enough how important it is to recognize them and leave immediately. Both types of tracks within the same square mile, especially if they're fresh and crossing each other's paths, is the biggest warning sign that you're in contested territory. Evidence of recent violent activity, torn ground, broken trees, blood spatter on rocks and leaves, means you're in an active war zone and need to get out. Dead silence in the forest indicates that every animal with sense has fled, which you should take as your cue to do the same thing as fast as possible. The feeling of being watched from multiple directions, that prickling sensation on the back of your neck, means you're being monitored by both creatures. They're probably sizing you up as a threat or non-threat before they engage with each other, and you don't want to be around when that engagement starts. Territorial markers from both species in close proximity, Bigfoot tree breaks and rock stacks near Dogman claw marks and scent posts, means you're standing in contested ground that both creatures claim. If you see these signs, you need to leave immediately. Don't try to observe. Don't try to get evidence. Don't try to photograph or record anything. Don't convince yourself it's safe because you haven't seen either creature yet. The fact that you're seeing these signs means both creatures are in the area, and when they find each other, you don't want to be anywhere nearby. When Bigfoot and Dogman are actively engaged in territorial conflict, humans are obstacles at best. You don't want to be an obstacle when two apex cryptids decide to settle their dispute. I learned this lesson the hard way, and I'm lucky I survived to tell about it. Lucky that I was never quite in the wrong place at the wrong moment, never standing in the direct path when they charged, never close enough to the actual fight to get hit by debris or caught in the violence. The Appalachian wilderness is beautiful and awe-inspiring, and I still love it despite everything I've seen. But there are areas where humans are not the dominant species. There are territories where an ancient war is ongoing, where Bigfoot families defend their homes against Dogman predators, where the forest floor is stained with the blood of their endless conflict. Stay out of the crossfire. Learn to recognize the signs, trust your instincts when something feels wrong, and don't let curiosity override your survival instinct. Because the most dangerous thing in the woods isn't a Bigfoot or a Dogman, it's being between them when they decide to fight. That's how you don't come home. For more interesting stories, check this out.